During these complex and intense times, our reality can sometimes feel like it's drowning in mountains of information and conflicting narratives. By design, certain forces want to create chaos and confusion, rendering populations stunned and perplexed in what the truth actually is in any given situation. Some have coined this as non-linear or sometimes hybrid warfare. The question is there a way for us to be able to bury down to the core truth of what has occurred in the past and present, and maybe even predict what may materialise in the future with a certain degree of accuracy? There is potential for all of us to tap into latent skills that all humans have, with the ability to access and carry out our own investigation on what is actually going on within this given reality. The conscious method I'm referring to is commonly known as remote viewing. Some have described it as being a militarised form of psychic mediumship, which due to its structured steps allows people under blind conditions to accurately describe any location or even situation. Put simply, this method empowers anyone to view events, people, locations within their own mind and to access the potential truth in any given scenario. So would you like to understand how the pyramids of Giza were built in ancient Egypt, or who really shot JFK, or even discover if an ancient civilization existed on the planet Mars? Any casual search on mainstream web platforms such as Google or Wikipedia describes remote viewing, or RV for short, as having zero scientific evidence to back up its claims. Curious minds would have other ideas over this blanket rejection of RV's potential power. If the general population could easily access all and any information purely through being in a calm, peaceful state, just think of the chaos this would bring to current paradigm of controlling humanity's perception. And the control of people's perception is of paramount importance to certain global controllers. Superhuman-like abilities such as psychic foresight, telekinesis, and astral projection is well known in more esoteric circles. Some may be surprised that these abilities have been extensively researched covertly by intelligence agencies, particularly in times of conflict, and namely during the Cold War. Remote viewing's beginnings start with three individuals: Ingo Swann, Russell Targ, and Harold Puthoff. Russell Targ had a fascination with the paranormal after accessing various esoteric books from his father's bookshop based in Chicago. Targ carried on his fascination with these subjects even after studying physics in New York, both at Queens College and Columbia University in the United States. Hal Puthoff academically had graduated with a PhD from Stanford in electrical engineering and eventually went on to work with naval intelligence for a number of years. After attending a lecture by Hal Puthoff at Stanford University concerning psychic discoveries behind the Iron Curtain, Targ found an academic inroad to explore his passion in more esoteric-based subjects, specifically surrounding ESP and psychic phenomena. Stanford Institute of Research, or SRI, was willing to provide research grants to investigate ESP abilities. In June 1972, both Targ and Puthoff joined forces to pursue this research further. Many perceived the research money was granted due to the background rumours that Russia was heavily invested in ESP research and had already made significant headway. They were originally tasked with 8 months to explore ESP abilities at Stanford. The third RV pioneer, Ingo Swann, was an artist in his late 30s. At the beginning of the 1970s, he had already worked with a few researchers documenting his ESP abilities. Swann is important because he would go on to design much of the protocols of the RV process, and would remain for a long time a key instructor and mentor to other future remote viewers. One of the first experiments that caught the attention of the CIA involving Swann concerned him being able to physically affect a highly sensitive magnetometer buried deep within 30 feet of concrete, situated at Stanford Labs, purely by using his mind. Many of the early experiments of ESP involved viewing hidden images sealed within envelopes. In Ingo Swann's book Penetration, he describes these initial repetitive experiments as being pretty boring. He was very eager to try something unusual to really push the boundaries of his abilities. What Swann suggested had never been tried before, due to the distances of the RV target. Around that time, scientists still knew relatively little about the planet Jupiter. But in 1973, NASA had launched Pioneer 10 and 11 to fly past Jupiter and to collect technical information concerning the planetary body. Then as now, minds were very locked and very conventional, so attempting to remote view a planet made people very nervous. Swan's idea was to view the planet Jupiter and to collect data before the two satellites reached the planet to compare his accuracy in the results. The rest of the team was very reluctant to proceed with this idea. Swan eventually threatened to quit the program unless he was allowed to try. The others backed down and eventually agreed to the unorthodox experiment. Once the two satellites had reached Jupiter and beamed back their results to scientists, Swan's RV Jupiter target data turned out to be highly accurate. Swan had inadvertently discovered something very exciting and new, and pioneered a completely new field of study within RV's potential. A further early experiment involved both Russell Targ and Harold Puthoff driving to an undisclosed location held within a sealed envelope. The chosen location was Palo Alto City Hall, which was situated 2 miles away from Swan's location. He managed to pick up mentally a lot of the physical characteristics of the building and surrounding plaza, such as the fountains and even the distinctive paved patterning on the plaza floor. As research progressed, the protocols and understandings started to mature and develop with RV's possibilities. Swan discovered a further aspect to the protocols with the use of map coordinates. This new area of RV was known as Scan 8. One of the early sessions saw him coincidentally target into a top secret US military surveillance base known as Sugar Grove in West Virginia. The base was predominantly used for listening in on Russian activity. The discovery of this covert base was quite by accident and caused shockwaves through the intelligence community due to the sensitivity of the site. Another individual working on Scan 8 targets was Pat Price, who would eventually develop into one of the most powerfully accurate remote viewers in its history. Price was a former police commissioner from Burbank, California. He was so accurate with his remote viewing results that the CIA allegedly abducted him in 1975 because they were concerned over how much of a security risk he was in the wrong hands. It was reported that he allegedly continued on remote viewing directly for the CIA, away from Stanford research team, from a farm situated outside of Washington. Price sadly died under suspicious circumstances, some think by assassination, using a gun that covertly elicits a heart attack in order to deceive people that the resulting death was from natural causes. Later on, some remote viewers did actually claim he was still alive and continued to operate in secret after an orchestrated death. The successful nature of remote viewing within the intelligence gathering field eventually meant that the CIA, DIA, the Navy, and Army all wanted to create their own remote viewing teams. During the early development of remote viewing, there were many other names associated with its history: Joe McMoneagle, Lynn Buchanan, Dale Graff, Kit Green, Uri Geller, Hella Hansen, and Edward May, to name a few. By this point, remote viewing was gaining traction in the intelligence community, but among certain quarters there was still resistance from people who just couldn't accept its operational power, and even with mounting data, that was undeniably proving its use. Some perceive viewers as indulging in demonic activity, harnessing satanic forces. It's strange how much comfort and security people receive from reality being a certain way. If anything deviates or counters mainstream views, people can stubbornly grip on tight to old paradigms and ways of being. Even watching interviews and researching for this topic, key players are reluctant to verge into areas discussing RV's capability in viewing, for example, the extraterrestrial presence, for fear of being labelled as a pseudo-scientist or not credible. They obviously feel that for remote viewing to be taken seriously, these topics on camera or in the mainstream need to be avoided from being discussed openly. In essence, this is a huge white elephant, a glaring presence in our reality that we are not alone, and that this otherworldly force, whether extraterrestrial or interdimensional, is interacting and maybe even manipulating world events and what we're experiencing as a human collective. On the more esoteric side of remote viewing and its application, we can refer back to Ingo Swann's book, Penetration, in which he discusses how a shadowy figure known as Mr. Axelrod contacted him. Swann agreed to meet and was covertly taken by helicopter around March 1975, blindfolded, to an undisclosed location. He described how his covert journey took him many levels below within an underground base to meet Mr. Axelrod. Axelrod asked numerous questions concerning remote viewing and its potential. He went on to feed Swann various coordinates linked to areas on the moon. Initially, Swan was experiencing expected normal lunar-type landscapes, but with some other locations, he started to see physical structures, very tall buildings that were reminiscent of the United Nations Secretariat building in New York. As the session continued, he would witness in his mind's eye dome structures, tubular buildings that stretched across the surface, strange bridges, advanced machinery, obelisks, and even straight roads that extended for miles. He also started to become aware of mining activity with tractor-like vehicles in operation on the moon. Eventually, his consciousness moved into an interior space that was dark. The air was warm, but filled with dust. He perceived human male individuals busy working on something. The weird aspect was that the men were all completely naked. None of them were wearing any clothes. Some of the individuals felt his presence and even started to point in his direction. Obviously, if they were related to humans, they demonstrated a more developed psychic ability. Shortly after this encounter, Axelrod abruptly ended the viewing session. The contact with the lunar-based male residents was maybe the reason the briefing was halted so quickly. Another planet that was viewed in the early years of RV within our solar system was Mars. Joseph McMoneagle's reputation was cemented during the Cold War after viewing a new experimental top-secret breed of submarines the Russians were devising at the time. McMoneagle was tasked with viewing a particular area of Mars known as Cydonia. In 1976, the satellite Viking Orbiter captured images which some researchers at the time claimed contained a face, pyramids, and a city that lay in ruins. Due to declassified CIA documentation, we can see that the agency took the orbiter images very seriously. This led them to involve McMoneagle, who, having recently woken up from a nap, was provided with the coordinates in a sealed envelope. He was viewing blind and so had no idea what the target was. As the session commenced, McMoneagle started to describe a large pyramid shape set within a valley, with other infrastructure close by, consisting of intersecting roads, aqueducts, and channels. He then made contact with beings who inhabited this area. They were humanoid in form, but very tall and thin. The beings communicated that they were experiencing an apocalyptic scenario. As a result, they had entered themselves into a type of stasis, awaiting for a search party to return with news of a new planetary home. The beings were very much mourning what they called the corruption of their environment. McMoneagle's consciousness followed the search party as they embarked on the journey to their new home. He described their spacecraft as boat-like in shape, with shiny surfaces. The beings landed in a chaotic environment that was volatile, filled with volcanoes, gas pockets, and strange vegetation. After the session was concluded, he opened the sealed envelope to find out he'd been tasked with remote viewing Mars approximately 1 million years ago. Some have theorized that these beings may have actually landed on Earth during a period of intense geographic instability. As you can see, both of these remote viewing targets expose how very little we know of our true history and surroundings. Although one can understand why certain figures wouldn't want to broadcast such information publicly. But what is the cost to this information sealing? What continuing damage are we doing to ourselves, this planet, and the future of our solar system if we are actively denying this aspect of our reality? As the SRI research progressed, it went through many evolutions and name changes, such as Gondola Wish, Grill Flame, Centre Lane, and finally Project Stargate, which is the most widely known name from the program. The original members of the team, Russell Targ and Hal Puthoff, would eventually both step aside to pursue more research-based work rather than handling the continuing general day-to-day administration of a research team. So in 1985, Edward May stepped in to take over as program director of the SRI program. Dr. Edward May was interviewed by New Paradigm Films in 2017. Under his tenure, he stated his team worked with 19 different US federal institutions on a large array of viewing projects. He estimated there was around 500 separate spying missions. They were so successful that 17 of those federal institutions returned back regularly with further targets. But in 1995, the CIA started a congressional directed evaluation into the usefulness of RV as an intelligence gathering tool called the Air Report. Their eventual conclusion was that it wasn't a valid intelligence gathering mechanism. Many criticised the scope and remit of the study, and that it had been purposefully set up to fail. This led to the inevitable cancellation of the nearly 20-year-old programme. Many suspect that the remote viewing continued on, but was actually taken into a more secret, covert black project space. But officially, the government discontinued its use within the overt world. But remote viewing very much continues to thrive. It hasn't been stopped. The original participants within these research projects went on to teach these skills to anyone that was willing to learn. You can buy books on the subject, watch YouTube videos, attend courses. The skills are out there for anyone wishing to connect with and experiment. The scope of remote viewing isn't only confined to looking at potential physical targets within our world or beyond. It can include abstract concepts, such as remote viewing financial markets, predicting future trends, or even speaking to your future self to analyse the best optimal timeline to take based on your current decisions you may have to make. There are many civilian remote viewing groups which people can find online. Dick Algire, a veteran remote viewer, started cryptoviewing.com, which, as the name suggests, remote views potential movements in the cryptocurrency market with a view to find investment opportunities. Notably, they predicted the recent crash of the crypto FTX exchange. Algire and his team also explore other world events, present and historical. To find out more, the majority of their work is accessed via Patreon. Another collective of civilian remote viewers who have provided a huge amount of data and research come from the Farsight Institute. This organisation was started by Courtney Brown, who in parallel works as an academic at Emory University in the area of applied mathematics, with its application in the field of social sciences. Also on the board of directors of Farsight is Lynn Buchanan, who, as mentioned earlier, has extensive links with the original SRI programme. Farsight releases a certain amount of content freely on YouTube, but the extensive body of their work is to be found using a subscription-based model hosted by Vimeo via farsightprime.com. The rotating team of mostly young remote viewers explore monthly targets of human geo-based politics that are set to occur during the month ahead, along with monthly investigations into extraterrestrial activity and their interaction with human society and Earth as a whole. Along with these monthly updates, they explore larger, more esoteric targets like the Roswell UFO crash, the building of the Egyptian pyramids, Area 51, the annihilation of the dinosaurs, Lucifer, the Prophet Muhammad. They've even viewed the origins of the reptilian ETs. The eye-opening aspect of all this research has been the overwhelming realisation of how much extraterrestrial or interdimensional entities are meddling and influencing human affairs. In fact, the majority of wars and chaos that is inflicted on humanity has a non-human construct to it. It should also be noted that all of Farsight's data, they claim, is done under blind conditions, so the remote viewers have no idea what they're being tasked to physically target. The non-human intelligence aspect to our reality is a very daunting prospect, especially due to the fact that the majority of the world's population believe that ETs or any other intelligences in the universe don't exist, and for the majority to even believe in such a concept is deemed as wrongthink. In fact, the director of Farsight, Courtney Brown, specifically sent out a recorded video plea to members of the military to take notice of the current global situation and to act. He perceives the only way to prevent further chaos is for disclosure to happen, to finally start speaking the truth concerning that we are not alone and never have been. In essence, to deny the relevance and potential usefulness of remote viewing and its value to humanity would be massively counterproductive. If humanity is ever going to halt the seemingly chaotic spiral of society at the hands of corporations, politicians, technocrats and billionaires, who are for the majority probably manipulated by non-human based intelligences for the purposes of long-term control of our reality, remote viewing is a technique that can possibly free us from these invisible chains. Much of us in the realms of the alternative media maybe rely on information from shadowy covert insiders, whistleblowers, and even intuitive channelers. Remote viewing is a way to really verify what's true and untrue for ourselves. If we individually explore and practice this latent method, it could allow us to see the truth amongst the noise and the chaos, to define and empower our own realities. I've been Simon. This is Reconsider. Thank you so much for listening.